Thank you for joining us today at Homestead for Life. Today we are making potato soup. We are going to can it in our lovely Carey Canner here. So I've prepped up all the ingredients. I've got my potatoes already peeled, cut up in about 1/2 inch to 1 inch chunks, and they are in lemon water, a little bit of lemon. You can do ascorbic acid or something like that, citric acid. So we just want to make sure they don't get any brown or yucky. I've got my scallions out of the garden. I've got onion, I've got celery, minced garlic, bacon, sage, some seasonings. This is not an exact science, so however you want your potato soup, that's what we're going to add in. And while we're cooking up all the things, let's get our canner going. So we're going to load this up. We've got our jars. We've got our jars with a little bit of half full. We've got 8 cups of water in here, plus what's in the jars. And we are just going to put this on slow cook just to heat up the canner, heat up the jars, get all that ready so that when everything's done on the stove, we can load it right up. All right, so to the stove we go. Okay, our pot is still cold, but we are going to get our bacon pieces going. So they are already cut up in probably 1 inch slices. There's about 2 slices of bacon in there. It's not a whole ton. But we're going to get that cooking up. And I missed an ingredient. We need broth, bone broth, chicken broth. So I've got that as well. So we'll add that in later. But now we just wait for the bacon. Our bacon is done. I was probably a little stingy on the bacon. And that's because this is really good bacon. And it's got to last me through my weekend breakfast as well, this pack. Really good stuff from the butcher. So I did end up adding a little bit of bacon grease because our next step, we are going to cook down our onions and everything in the grease before we add the potatoes and everything. So needed a little bit more grease than my 2 measly slices of bacon was going to do. But also, what recipe goes wrong with more bacon? What was I thinking when I prepped these ingredients? I was thinking that I'm cheap, but that is okay. So we're not going to have a heavy bacon flavor necessarily, but everything is still going to be cooked in the bacon grease. That is okay. So we are going to add our onions to our bacon grease carefully. We are going to add our celery. And then when these are almost done, then we are going to add our garlic. So garlic will cook and burn much faster than onions and celery. So we are going to cook these till they're almost translucent, and then we're going to add our garlic. You can add other ingredients here if you put peppers or anything like that in your potato soup. Now's the time. I don't. I am going to put a little bit of cayenne pepper. That was our canner finally heated up, so now the 30-minute slow cook function is going. But we're just going to give these 5 minutes or so to get translucent and then add our garlic. All right, so we are getting there on the translucent scale with the onion, so we are going to add in our minced garlic. And give this a couple more minutes before we add in everything else. All right, so our onions are pretty clear. Now we're going to add in the rest of our ingredients. So in go the scallions. Bacon goes back in. The potatoes I've strained out already. So in go the potatoes. I'm going to add in our broth. So when we can this, only 50% of the jars can be filled with the potatoes and your other veggies. The rest has to be liquid. So your broth, we may need to add some water, depending on how far this goes. I think I've got too many potatoes for my 5 jars, my 5 pint jars that I've got heating up, which is fine because leftovers are lunch. All right, so we've got most of our main ingredients here. So now it's just some seasonings. So you'll notice I am not measuring things out, which probably makes me really hard to follow, and I do apologize for that. It's just sort of a personal preference on everything when you're canning, except for jellies, because those have to be that exact balance to get that jelly consistency. Pretty much everything else is kind of by the seat of your pants in canning. It's personal preferences. So this is sage out of my garden, so we're going to chop this up. Probably 5 or 6 leaves here, more than my little scissors want to handle. That's all right. Nifty little herb scissors I got online for like $1 a few years ago. They've been pretty handy with this exact type of thing. Paprika, which is probably one of my favorite seasonings, so I'm gonna have a little more. And while I'm adding too much paprika and just a little bit of my cayenne, I will remind you that anything you can, your seasonings are gonna get turbocharged. So be very, very light-handed with your seasonings. Yes, I do understand the irony as I'm saying that. We're going to mix it all up, and we're going to cook this for about 15 minutes until our potatoes start getting soft, and then we are going to can it up. All right, so our soup was boiling. Our potatoes are starting to get soft, and our canner more than finished its 30-minute slow cook timer. So our jars are ready to be filled. So we are doing pint jars. You can do quarts if you prefer. Potato soup is one of my favorite soups. So I am going to be taking some of these to lunch over the next however long. So pints are the perfect size for that. Okay, so we talked about a little bit before. I mentioned we are going to fill it halfway with solids, and then we're going to fill the rest of the way with liquids. So I've got my slotted spoon here. I'm going to mix everything up. And fill our jars about halfway. And then we're going to go back behind it, and we are going to fill them the rest of the way up with liquids. Okay, we are going to make sure we've got all of our air bubbles out of here, and we want 1 inch of headspace on our jars. So we've got our headspace, we've got our air pockets out, so now we're going to wipe the rims and put our lids on there. All right, so we are using apple cider vinegar. Sorry, distilled white vinegar, not apple cider vinegar. And we're going to use that to wipe off the rims of our jars so that our lids can seal without any issues. There's no debris. There's no broth, there's no oils, there's no nothing in the way of your perfect seal. All right, we are going to put the remaining vinegar in the canner. It's supposed to help with fogginess. I don't know. Grab our rings off my handy dandy organizer. And let's see, 5 lids, I can't count. Okay. And we are just going to finger tighten all of these down and load them carefully, because remember, jars are hot. The soup inside of them is hot. Everything's hot. So be very careful putting your rings on and loading them in the canner. Use your oven mitts and your tongs and whatever else you need if necessary. All right, now we're going to load up the canner. All right. All right, I'm going to plug the canner back in, and we are going to cook this for 1 hour and 15 minutes for pints. It's 1 hour and a half for quarts. So we're going to go high plus forever. And start. And then once our countdown is ready, we're going to come over, we're going to flip this to airtight, and our countdown will start. So one of the things you may be asking yourself about now is about the soup. So we don't have a creamy, buttery soup base here. We just have really like a vegetable soup, a potato-based soup, because we don't ever want to can dairy products, right? We don't want to can anything with thickeners added in advance. I know a lot of people do. There's a lot of recipes out there. The National Center for Home Food Preservation says don't do it, so I'm certainly not going to put it on my channel, but you Rebel Canners, you go for it. Still waiting for someone to come up with a YouTube channel called Rebel Canners. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this soup, I'm going to add some milk and make it more of that creamy consistency. And then we're going to add cheese, because we're not canning the leftovers. We can do whatever we want with them. So sort of a 2-for-1 recipe for you today. So first I'm going to smush it so it's more of a creamy soup. I'm going to add my milk. And then for the cheese, I'm actually going to sprinkle that on top. So you won't have it in your recipe so much, but when you portion this out, when you eat it, when you serve it, that's when we are going to add our cheese. So, but in the meantime, let's get our milk added. Let's get this back on the stove for a few minutes. See you over there. All right, so we're back to the stove. We are going to add some milk. Very precise measurements here, right? We are going to add milk and get it to the consistency we want. Ooh, it splashes, be careful. Get this all heated back up. Simmer it for a couple minutes. And then that's it. You have your creamier potato soup ready to throw some cheese on top and enjoy today. And then you've got your canned potato soup for later. So you can can any soup recipe that you want with a couple caveats. So no dairies, no thickeners, no pasta, no rices. And if you're putting beans in it, the beans need to be fully rehydrated in advance. All right. And that looks wonderful. All right, so we are going to let that finish heating up. And then we've got dinner tomorrow. Yum. These are single servings of our creamy potato soup, not just our vegetable potato soup. Well, that one's filled a little too high. It is not going to fit with the lid on it. It almost made it with all these little single serve containers. But this is it. This is our soup. It is good to go and enjoy tomorrow or tonight or whenever the heck we feel like it. So now we're just waiting on our canned potato soup. Now that our timer has counted down to E1, we are going to change this to airtight. And as soon as it has gotten up to that right pressure, our timer is going to start and the countdown will begin. Once the timer is up, we're going to come back and unplug it. Okay, it's just counted down to E0. But we'll come back and unplug it after the timer counts down. And then we will leave it sit for an hour. In our case, we're going to leave it sit overnight. And come back and check it out tomorrow and make sure everything's sealed up. Okay, our timer is up, so we are going to unplug our canner and let the pressure just slow release, and we will pull out our jars in the morning. Good morning, it's the moment of truth. So we are going to pop this sucker open and check all of our jars. So any of them that didn't seal will end up going directly into the fridge to be used as soon as possible. But seal, so far so good. They have all sealed. Excellent, excellent, excellent. All right, so our next steps are to let them cool off on the counter here. We're going to remove the rings because they have already sealed, so we don't need them anymore. And then once they cool off, so after work tonight, what we'll do is we will wipe the rims off so we don't grow any bacteria or anything around the rims like that. And then label them and store them in a cool, dark, dry place. And that's it. That is our potato soup. Thanks for joining us.